I never imagined a two-word text message could turn a quiet old man into the last line of defense between his daughter and a killer. At first, it looked like an ordinary family gathering falling apart. But by midnight, it had become something no father ever wants to live through. "Please don't let him kill me." Those were the words my daughter whispered into the phone the night everything broke apart. I can still hear what was behind her voice, glass shattering, a man screaming, and underneath it all, real fear. The kind no father ever forgets. By the time I reached her house 10 minutes later, my son-in-law was lying face down on his own kitchen floor with my knee pressed against his shoulder blade, while 2 county deputies rushed through the front door. He kept shouting that I'd attacked him. But the deputies weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. One of them noticed the way I controlled his wrist without hurting him. The stillness in my breathing. The awareness in my eyes. Men who have served recognize that in each other, even decades later. He studied me for a moment. "Sir, were you in the service?" I stared straight ahead. "Retired Navy." That was all I said. I didn't mention the years overseas. Didn't mention the missions I still can't talk about. Didn't mention the friends I buried. At my age, silence comes easier, especially when most of your life has been spent trying to forget. 3 months earlier, nobody in our family would have believed it could end this way. Least of all Damien. Damien Cross was 39, tall, expensive haircut, the kind of smile built for a sales floor. He sold luxury trucks outside Savannah and carried himself like a man who expected applause just for walking into a room. When he married my daughter Olivia, I tried to like him. I wanted to like him. After my wife Rebecca died of breast cancer 12 years earlier, Olivia was all I had left. So when she brought Damien home glowing like a teenager again, I overlooked a lot. The bragging. The drinking. The way he talked over her. The nervous little laugh she gave whenever he teased her in front of people. I told myself every young couple has rough edges. That may have been my first mistake. My name is Nathan Reed. I'm 68 years old, a retired widower living in a small coastal town in Georgia, the kind of place where everybody fishes, everybody goes to church on Sunday, and everybody assumes family trouble stops at the front porch. Most folks around here know me as the quiet old man with the pickup truck and the Labrador named Duke. They see me at the farmer's market buying tomatoes. They see me fixing a neighbor's lawnmower. They see me at the diner every Thursday morning with black coffee and nothing else. That's all they see. And for years that suited me fine. I spent 26 years inside naval special warfare. By the time I retired, I'd had enough noise, enough funerals, enough adrenaline to fill several lifetimes. Peace became something precious. Or at least I thought I had peace. The first time I sensed something was wrong in Olivia's marriage was 2 Thanksgivings earlier. She'd always loved cooking with her mother growing up: sweet potato casserole, homemade rolls, pecan pie. Rebecca taught her all of it. That year the turkey came out a little dry. Nothing dramatic. Damien carved 1 slice, smirked, and said loud enough for the whole table, "Good thing you're pretty, honey, because you're sure not winning any cooking contests." Everyone laughed uncomfortably. Olivia laughed too. But I saw her shoulders tighten a half-second before the laugh even landed. Years on the teams teach you to read tiny reactions. Tiny reactions tell the truth long before words do. I started watching more closely after that. At Christmas, he mocked the sweater she was wearing. At Easter, he snapped at her over forgotten ice for the cooler. At every family dinner, he corrected the way she told stories. "That's not how it happened. You always exaggerate." Small cuts over and over. And every time she smiled through it. That smile worried me more than if she'd fought back. One July evening, I had them over for a backyard cookout. Nothing fancy: burgers, corn, store-brand potato salad, a couple of neighbors dropping by. Damien had already been drinking before he even arrived. I could smell it under his cologne. He watched me at the grill and laughed. "You know, Nathan, you're the calmest old man I've ever met." "Is that an insult?" "Now," he said. "Just saying. Most retired military guys never shut up about it." "You barely mention it." "That's because I retired." The neighbors chuckled. Damien kept going. "Seriously, what you even do in the Navy?" "File paperwork." More laughter. I shrugged. "Something like that." He pointed his beer bottle at me like he'd made a point. "See, that's exactly what I mean. Olivia acts like you're some kind of secret badass." Olivia's face went tight. "Damien. Stop." He grinned wider. "What?" "I'm kidding." Then he leaned in. "Honestly, I think most of these old war stories are exaggerated." The backyard went quiet. I flipped another burger. No reaction. That frustrated him more than anything I could have said. Men like Damien feed on reactions. Without one, they start to feel invisible. A few minutes later, Olivia followed me into the kitchen to help carry plates. The moment we were alone, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at her carefully. There was a faint bruise near her wrist, half covered with makeup. My stomach dropped. "What happened there?" She yanked her sleeve down instantly. "Nothing." "Olivia." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad. Please." That word "please" wasn't defensive. It wasn't irritated. It was afraid. And in that instant I knew. Maybe not every detail. But enough. That night after everyone left, I sat alone in my garage workshop. Duke slept beside my chair while rain tapped the roof. I opened an old wooden storage chest I hadn't touched in years, photographs of men long gone, challenge coins, service medals, a folded flag, and one laminated card of emergency signal phrases. When Olivia was 16, I taught her basic safety codes. Nothing extreme. Just precautions. If she was ever in danger and couldn't speak freely, she could send a simple phrase and I would understand exactly what it meant. We treated it almost like a game back then. But I made her memorize one rule: if you ever send the real code, I come immediately. No questions asked. She'd rolled her eyes at 16. "Dad, you watch too many spy movies." Maybe I did. Or maybe fathers simply understand the world in ways daughters wish they didn't have to. Around midnight my phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. "Dad, can you send me Mom's peach pie recipe?" And underneath it, a string of numbers. My blood went cold. That number meant only one thing. Immediate danger. "Call the police." I stared at the screen for maybe 2 seconds. Then 26 years of training woke back up inside me. Calm. Focused. Cold. I stood, walked to the gun safe, and opened it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because my daughter was afraid, and fear turns a father into something dangerous. There's something strange about fear once you're older. Young men think fear is loud, pounding heart, shaking hands, ragged breathing. But the real fear, the kind that arrives when someone you love might be dying, comes quiet. Cold. Efficient. That's how it felt driving through the dark toward Olivia's neighborhood. The wipers pushed heavy rain aside while my headlights cut through sheets of water. I had 911 on speaker. The dispatcher sounded young, careful. "Sir, can you describe the situation?" "Possible domestic assault in progress. Female victim inside the residence. Male suspect intoxicated. Are weapons involved?" "Unknown." "Sir, are you currently approaching the house?" "Yes." "Please wait for responding officers." I watched my own headlights swallow the wet road ahead. "No," I said quietly. "I won't be doing that." A pause. "Sir, are you armed?" "Yes." Another pause. "What kind of firearms?" "Locked in the vehicle. I don't intend to use it unless absolutely necessary." That part was true. People assume retired veterans are eager for violence. Most of us spend the rest of our lives trying to avoid it. Officers are 4 minutes out, she said, her voice softening. I'll stay on with you. I hung up before she could argue. Olivia's subdivision sat near a half-finished development where construction had stalled years earlier. Dark houses. Wet pavement. No movement anywhere. By the time I pulled up across the street, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle. Every downstairs light in her house was on. I could hear the shouting before I even opened the truck door. I crossed the yard quietly. Age changes how you move. At 68, my knees ache in the cold and my shoulders pop when I reach too high. But training never fully leaves your body. Not the parts that matter. Awareness. Balance. Timing. Through the front window, I saw Olivia backed against the kitchen counter, crying blood at the corner of her lip. Damien stood inches from her face, screaming, broken glass scattered across the floor. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her stumble. Something inside me went perfectly still. Not angry. People are always surprised when I say that. Anger is emotional. This was something else entirely. This was the stillness of watching a wolf circle a child. I moved toward the side gate. The patio door hung open, rain drifting through the curtains. Inside, Damien was still shouting. You think your daddy's gonna save you? Olivia tried to pull away. Please. Stop. He shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to knock her down. Hard enough to terrify her. That was enough. I stepped through the door in silence. No dramatic entrance. No shouting. The old hardwood barely creaked under my boots. Damien didn't notice me until Olivia's eyes went wide. Dad. He spun around and for one unbelievable second, he actually smiled. Look who it is. Captain America. I kept walking calm. Step away from her. He scoffed. Or what? Step away from my daughter. Olivia's breath came in short, panicked bursts. Damien spread his arms wide, mocking. Oh, the old man's serious, he pointed at me. You know what your problem is, Nathan. Everybody treats you like some wise old veteran. You're just a retired nobody hiding in a garage. I didn't answer. People expect danger to announce itself loudly. Real danger rarely does. He took 2 aggressive steps toward me. That was his mistake. The instant his shoulder dipped forward, instinct took over. One motion. That's all it took. Faster than he could process, I redirected his arm, turned him, and drove him face first onto the kitchen floor. He hit the tile cursing. What the hell's? I pinned his wrist behind his back. Firm. Controlled. Not enough to break anything. Enough to end it. Stop resisting, I said quietly. Olivia stood frozen near the counter, sobbing into her hands. Damien bucked once beneath me. I adjusted the pressure. He gasped. You're hurting me. You're not hurt, I said. You're restrained. That only made him angrier. He spat curses, thrashing under my knee. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds before red and blue light swept across the living room windows. 2 deputies came through the front door, weapons raised. Sheriff's Department. I released one hand slowly, raised it. Victim secure. Suspect restrained. Both deputies froze for a half second. The younger one aimed at Damien's. The older one studied me, not my face, my posture. My breathing. My control. Sir, can you stand up slowly? I rose off Damien carefully. The moment the pressure lifted, he rolled over screaming. This psycho attacked me. The deputy ignored him completely and turned to Olivia. Ma'am, are you injured? Her lip trembled. Yes. That single word changed everything in the room. The younger deputy cuffed Damien and began reading his rights over his furious protests. You can't, he attacked me first, this is insane. Nobody was listening. Olivia collapsed against the counter, crying in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl. I grabbed a blanket off the nearby chair and wrapped it around her shoulders the same way I used to after thunderstorms. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe now." She clung to me, and that nearly broke me. Fathers always believe they'll recognize when their child is suffering. But sometimes suffering grows slowly, quietly, right inside your own family, and you don't see it until it's almost too late. The older deputy approached me once the paramedics arrived. Low voice. Respectful. "You military. Retired Navy." His eyes flicked briefly toward how I'd restrained Damien, then back to my face. "You handled that professionally." Professionally. As if this had been just another operation. It wasn't. This was my daughter. And standing there, I realized something painful. I should have come sooner. The strangest part about a house after violence is the silence afterward. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles into the walls like smoke after a fire. Olivia stayed with me after Damien's arrest. At first, neither of us talked much. She slept in her old bedroom upstairs, the one still lined with faded horse posters from when she was 13. I hadn't changed a thing since she moved out, same quilt Rebecca sewed, same little lighthouse lamp on the nightstand. Maybe part of me always hoped she'd come home again someday. Just not like this. The first morning after the arrest, I woke before sunrise out of old habit and started coffee. Rain still tapped the windows while Duke snored by the back door. Olivia came downstairs in one of my old navy sweatshirts. Her lip looked worse in daylight, swollen, a small cut at the corner. Seeing it made my chest tighten all over again. She wouldn't look at me while pouring her coffee. "Sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For all this." That answer told me everything about how long she'd been trapped inside her own mind. Victims apologize for surviving. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart." Her eyes filled instantly. She looked away. "I should have left him sooner." "Maybe," I said gently. "But fear makes people stay in bad places longer than they should." Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she said something that shattered me. "I didn't want you to think I failed." At 68, after war and funerals and everything else life had thrown at me, certain sentences still know exactly how to cut through your ribs. I stared at my coffee, because part of the truth was mine to own too. I hadn't been an easy father after Rebecca died. Men of my generation were taught that grief was weakness. You worked through pain, stayed quiet, kept moving. So that's what I did. Fixed engines. Cleaned gutters. Mowed lawns twice a week. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough to feel alone. Olivia was 24 then. Heartbroken. Still needing her father. And emotionally, I disappeared into myself. Not cruelly. Quietly. But children, even grown ones, notice distance more than we realize. A few days later, she finally opened up for real. We sat on the back porch watching rain drift across the marsh while Duke chased squirrels through the wet grass. She wrapped both hands around a mug of tea. "He wasn't always like this," she said softly. I stayed quiet. At first, Damien was charming. Funny. Protective. "That's usually how it starts," I said. She nodded slowly. "After we got married, little things changed." "Like what?" "He started criticizing my friends. Then my clothes. Then how I talked." She stared out at the trees. "If dinner wasn't ready on time, he'd get irritated. If I disagreed with him in public, he'd punish me for it later." "What kind of punishment?" She swallowed hard. "Silent treatment at first. Then yelling." Her voice shrank. "The first time he shoved me, he cried afterward. Said he was stressed. Said it would never happen again." I closed my eyes briefly. The cycle. Apology, excuse, temporary kindness, escalation. I kept thinking if I got calmer or better, things would go back to how they were, she said. That's not how men like him work. I know that now, she looked at me carefully. But I didn't then. The pain in her voice wasn't only fear. It was shame. That's something people misunderstand about abuse. Shame traps victims almost as hard as fear does. Especially women from good families. Especially women raised to protect appearances. I was ashamed people would think I chose the wrong man, she whispered. Everybody chooses wrong sometimes. She shook her head. Not Mom. That one landed hard because Rebecca had been warm where I was disciplined, gentle where I was guarded. Olivia inherited her mother's softness. And maybe that softness had made her vulnerable to a man who mistook kindness for weakness. A few days later, Detective Emily Carter came to the house. Mid-40s, direct, no wasted words. She sat at my kitchen table going through paperwork while Olivia twisted a tissue in her lap. We pulled data from Damien's phone and laptop, the detective said. There's evidence supporting a pattern of ongoing abuse. Olivia looked down. Then quietly, there's more. The detective raised an eyebrow. Olivia reached into her purse and pulled out an old flash drive. I started recording our arguments months ago. The room went still. Detective Carter plugged it into her laptop. The first clip lasted only 40 seconds. But 40 seconds was enough. Damien screaming. Something breaking. Olivia crying. And then one sentence that turned my blood to ice. If your father ever gets involved, I'll make sure he regrets it. The detective pulled her headphones off slowly. That's going to help your case a great deal. Olivia looked ashamed again. I know recording him was wrong. No, the detective said firmly. Surviving isn't wrong. That sentence visibly loosened something in Olivia. Sometimes victims just need someone to give them permission to stop blaming themselves. That evening, after the detective left, I went out to the garage alone. I sat at my old workbench and stared into nothing for a long time. The old memories came back harder than they had in years, young men bleeding overseas, standing on porches to tell parents their sons weren't coming home, all the times I'd stayed detached because that was how you survived. Maybe I'd done the same thing as a father. Compartmentalized too much. Later that night, Olivia found me sitting there in the dark. Can't sleep either, she asked. I shook my head. For a while, we just listened to the rain on the roof. Dad, she said finally. Were you scared overseas? Nobody had asked me that in years. I gave her a tired half smile. All the time. She looked genuinely surprised. But you were a SEAL. Fear doesn't disappear because of training. What matters is what you do while you're afraid. She stared at her hands. I was afraid every single day with Damien. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You don't have to live afraid anymore. And for the first time since she was a little girl, my daughter leaned against my shoulder and cried herself to sleep. I never expected to wear my dress uniform again. Not at my age. Not after everything. The last time I'd worn it was at Rebecca's funeral, 12 years earlier. Even then, I only put on the jacket because she'd always loved seeing me in it. She used to say it reminded her that underneath all my quiet, there was still a man who once carried himself with pride. After she died, I packed it away in the attic and figured it would stay there until I did too. But life has a way of reopening old closets when family needs you to. Damien's preliminary hearing came in late October. Gray skies, cold rain, the kind of damp morning that settles straight into your joints. Olivia sat beside me outside the courtroom, both hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. She looked healthier than she had in months, but still fragile in certain moments. Healing isn't dramatic. It's slow. Some mornings she smiled. Other mornings she barely left the guest room. Inside, Damien looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Something deeper. Confidence disappears fast once consequences finally arrive. His expensive suits were gone. His hair was unwashed. Weeks in county lockup had carved dark circles under his eyes. But the bitterness was still there. The moment he saw me next to Olivia, his jaw locked tight. His parents sat behind him, exhausted and visibly ashamed. I actually felt for them. No parent raises a child hoping he'll grow into someone cruel. At least I don't think they do. His attorney stood and immediately painted him as the real victim, a stressed husband, a hardworking provider, a man overwhelmed. Then he turned toward me. Mr. Reed used excessive force, acting far outside the law. I stayed perfectly still. The prosecutor barely reacted. Evidence doesn't care about performance. The state laid it all out. Olivia's injuries. Police photographs. Audio recordings. Medical reports. Neighbor statements. Then the body camera footage played. The courtroom watched in silence as the deputies entered that kitchen, and there I was on screen, calm, controlled, restraining Damien without ever striking him. No rage. Just containment. One camera caught him shouting drunken threats while Olivia cried against the counter, blood on her lip. The defense's argument fell apart after that. But Damien wasn't finished humiliating himself. On the stand, he blamed everyone but himself, the alcohol, the stress, the marriage, Olivia being too emotional. Then he looked straight at me and sneered. He brainwashed her against me. Something in Olivia hardened at that. I felt it beside me. She stood before the prosecutor even asked. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. No, she said. My father didn't brainwash me, a long breath. He saved my life. The courtroom went silent. She described years of emotional abuse in detail. The insults. The isolation. Walking on eggshells every single day. Several jurors looked visibly shaken. One older woman wiped her eyes. Then Olivia said something that nearly broke me all over again. I stopped recognizing myself during that marriage. That line hit harder than any memory I carried from combat, because war wounds soldiers. But abuse erases people slowly, while they're still breathing. During a recess, the prosecutor found me by the vending machines. You were special warfare, weren't you? I nodded. How could you tell? I asked. She smiled faintly. My brother was Marine Recon. We both understood. People who have served always recognize each other. Then her expression turned serious. Your restraint that night probably saved this case. If you'd lost your temper and hurt him badly, the defense would have turned this into a trial about you instead. I nodded slowly. She was right. Revenge feels satisfying in the moment. Control protects people far longer. It took me decades to fully understand that. The sentencing hearing came 6 weeks later. Olivia almost didn't go, but decided in the end that she needed the closure. That morning, I climbed into the attic and unzipped the old garment bag holding my dress uniform. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Pinning the medals back onto the chest, one by one, brought back memories I hadn't visited in years. Friends laughing in helicopters. Young men writing letters home. Funerals with folded flags. I held my silver star for a long moment before attaching it. Truthfully, I never cared much for medals. Medal doesn't bring anyone back. But they matter to the people watching. They remind civilians that sacrifice existed long before comfort became fashionable. When I walked into the courthouse in full dress whites, the hallway went quiet. Even Olivia stared. You never wear that, she whispered. I know. You look different. Maybe I was different. Or maybe she was finally seeing the parts of me I'd spent years hiding. Inside, Damien froze the moment he saw me. For the first time since I'd known him, real fear crossed his face. Not fear of violence. Fear of realizing that the quiet old man he used to mock at cookouts had carried burdens Damien couldn't have survived for a single week. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully before asking if I wished to make a statement. I stood slowly. Every joint reminded me I wasn't young anymore. But my voice held steady. I've spent most of my life around violence, I began. War. Death. Fear. Loss. The courtroom stayed silent. And here's the one thing I've learned, I glanced toward Damien. Strength has nothing to do with making people afraid of you, a few heads lowered. Real strength is protecting people who can't protect themselves. Especially your own family. Damien stared at the floor. No arrogance left. Just shame. I don't hate Damien, I said, and Olivia looked up in surprise. I hate what he became. I hate what he did. But hatred keeps causing damage long after the moment's gone if you let it, I paused. I'm asking this court for accountability. Not destruction. The sentence included prison time, mandatory substance treatment, a domestic violence program, and a permanent restraining order. As deputies led him toward the exit, Damien stopped and looked back at Olivia. His eyes were wet, not manipulative tears this time. Broken ones. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Olivia didn't answer. She just held my hand and watched him disappear through the doors. And for the first time in years, the fear in her eyes was finally gone. Winter moved slowly after the trial. That's the thing about healing at my age. Nothing happens fast anymore. Not recovery. Not trust. Not forgiveness. It all arrives one careful step at a time. By February, the cold coastal rain had softened into gentler mornings. The trees behind my property started showing green again, and Olivia began rebuilding piece by piece. She found a small apartment downtown, above a florist shop run by a widow named Diane. Nothing fancy. But safe. Quiet. Sunlight in the kitchen every morning. Safety becomes beautiful after chaos. She also went back to work part-time at the public library. She worried people would whisper about the trial. But small towns can surprise you. Most folks treated her gently, especially the older women, the ones who'd lived long enough to recognize real pain when they saw it. One afternoon over coffee, she admitted, I thought everyone would judge me for staying. I stirred cream into my mug. Most people over 60 have survived something painful. It changes how they see others. She looked down. I still feel embarrassed sometimes. That might stay a while, I said, then added, but shame fades faster when it's out in the open than when it's hidden. Rebecca used to say things like that. Funny how marriage leaves pieces of a person living inside you long after they're gone. My own life changed too. For years after retiring, I'd isolated myself more than I realized. Routine had become my hiding place. Hardware store, fishing pier, television, sleep, repeat. But after everything with Olivia, silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt lonely. So I started reconnecting. Mostly with other old veterans. A retired Marine named Marcus Steele talked me into Wednesday breakfasts at the VFW hall. I resisted at first, too many memories, too many old stories. But eventually I went. Turns out old soldiers laugh more than civilians expect. We talked about grandkids, bad knees, blood pressure medication, boats that wouldn't start. Almost nothing about combat. People are always surprised by that. Veterans don't spend their later years reliving glory. Mostly we spend it appreciating ordinary peace. One morning Marcus looked over and said, "You seem lighter these days." I thought about that the whole drive home. Maybe he was right. Not happy exactly. Lighter. Like some old weight had finally shifted. That spring, Olivia brought my grandson Ethan over for Sunday dinner. 10 years old, skinny, missing a front tooth, endlessly curious. Before the divorce, Damien had rarely let him visit alone, said I was too old-fashioned. Now Ethan ran through my backyard like he owned it. Kids recover from tension faster than adults if you give them safety early enough. That afternoon, we sat by the lake fishing for bluegill while dragonflies skimmed the water. Ethan studied me carefully. "Mom says you were in the Navy." "Something like that." He grinned. "Mom says you tackled Dad like Batman." I nearly choked laughing. "Your mother exaggerates." "No, she doesn't." "Yes, she does." He went quiet for a minute, then asked softly, "Why was Dad so mean?" There it was. The question every child eventually asks. I looked out over the water before answering. Sometimes people carry anger they never learned how to control. "Did he hate Mom?" "No," I said honestly. "That's what makes it sad." Ethan frowned. "Then why hurt hers?" I thought about all the years I'd spent studying violence in one form or another: war, fear, control, abuse. Then I gave him the simplest answer I had. Because some people confuse love with ownership. He considered that seriously, then nodded the way kids do when they understand more than adults expect. A few minutes later, I handed him the rod. "You know what real strength is?" "What?" "Making people feel safe around you." He caught a small bluegill 15 minutes later, grinning with pride. At 10 years old, he already handled disappointment better than a lot of grown men I've known. One evening in early summer, Olivia showed up at my door holding an envelope. "No return address." "I recognized the prison stamp," she said quietly. "Damien." She sat with me at the kitchen table while I opened it. The handwriting was rough, unpolished. No excuses. No self-pity. Just honesty about his drinking, his insecurity, his need for control, his shame. One line stayed with me. "I spent years trying to feel powerful by making other people smaller." That told me rehabilitation might actually be starting to work. Or at least beginning to. "What do you think?" Olivia asked when I finished. "I think remorse is painful when it's real." "Do you forgive him?" That question sat heavy between us. At my age, I've learned forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's something you practice, sometimes daily. "I don't know yet," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "That's fair." Then, after a long silence, she said something that nearly brought me to tears. "Thank you for saving me." I looked at my daughter, healthier now, stronger, still healing, and realized something important. I hadn't saved her alone. She saved herself the moment she asked for help. Not everyone finds the courage to do that. A few Sundays later, our family gathered again around my table. Nothing fancy. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, the kind of meal Rebecca used to make when money was tight but love wasn't. Sunlight poured through the kitchen while Ethan laughed at something on TV. Olivia looked peaceful for the first time in years. Not the forced kind of smile. Not survival mode. Real peace. And sitting there, listening to dishes clatter and family voices fill the house again, I finally understood something it took me nearly 7 decades to learn. When I was young, I thought strength meant winning fights. War taught me it meant surviving pain. But growing old taught me the truth. Strength is answering the phone when someone you love is afraid. Strength is staying calm when anger would feel so much easier. Strength is protecting people without losing your own humanity in the process. And sometimes, strength is finally letting yourself heal too. Sometimes justice isn't decided in a courtroom. It's decided by the choices we make. This was Cold Verdict. Because every story has a verdict.